Welcome. We're getting towards the middle of London Fashion Week, but it's a really exciting show that we're going to be talking about today because it's Mary Katrantzou, who is someone that across the world everyone looks to London to see, and she's come to really symbolise what London is about: colour and print and vibrancy. And actually, I've got a very vibrant panel with me as well, not in dress but in voice, to help me unpick the collection. But I'll let you guys introduce yourselves, starting with you.
My name is Brix Smith-Start, and I'm a TV presenter, and I co-own Start Boutiques with my husband Philip.
And I'm Frances Corner, and I'm head of the London College of Fashion.
My name's Dan Thawley, I'm the editor-in-chief of A Magazine, curated by.
And I'm Alice Cavanagh, I'm a writer and the editor of Miss Vogue Australia.
So we were just saying before we went live, we were talking about sort of what everyone's been seeing in London and what we've got to see still. What stood out so far? Dan, you've been at a lot of the shows. What's caught your fancy?
I've seen a fair bit of corduroy so far. And we were just also talking about the long dresses, which we've also seen in Mary's show. So I think there's actually also quite a lot of light layering for a winter season. I think everyone's probably playing with this trans-seasonal problem that is being found in boutiques everywhere.
Yeah.
So I've actually found it quite a light winter season so far.
That's interesting. Brix, give me your expertise on that, because obviously running a boutique, you must find that kind of seasonal problem if you get shoppers from all over the world coming in, especially online. You know,
Well, it's not only that, it's the weather is so crazy everywhere. So it's like, you need to have some winter coats, but you just never know what it's going to do. So trans-seasonal is totally the way forward, and we always think like that when we buy now.
So why is everyone still showing in this kind of spring, summer, autumn, winter thing? Frances, do you find that at the college, or sometimes when you're working with young designers, you think that that's something that's going to change when they grow up and graduate, or do you think we'll always kind of be stuck in this strange out of sync cycle that we're in at the moment?
The thing is, I think the convention is there, so students will tend to think, although they're also in a way developing their own ethos, so they tend to be thinking about that and not really thinking spring, summer, autumn, winter. And I think they're also so aware with pre-collections and cruise collections and everything else, that's also a factor that means they don't necessarily think under those terms, and actually I went to the Christopher Rayburn show, which again I really liked that, but it was that sort of sense of, although it was winter and the polar bear was the sort of a symbol of obviously climate change and all of those sorts of things, nevertheless it was quite a light collection actually. Sure. So I think those issues of the weather that we're living in, the fact that in a globalised market you need clothes for bikini and ski wear.
Yeah, and you must find that so much, Alice, with the Australia thing, like everything is completely out of sync, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I live in Paris, but in terms of shopping over there, it's definitely winter doesn't really come into play in terms of heavy coats. But for me personally, when I shop, I focus more on pre-fall and resort.
Yeah.
The shows are like definitely a big part of my work and everything, but personally I'm like more interested in the in-between. Which I guess is very trans-seasonal.
Yeah. Talking of kind of the big shows in terms of having the spring, summer, the autumn, winter, I think that's something that we're going to be discussing Mary Katrantzou, but Mary does really well, because obviously she does do her resort and pre-fall, but she's so good at making a spectacle of her show and making sort of it about her brand and about pushing sort of her aesthetic forward. What does Mary stand for in our opinion, and what's her strength? Why are we drawn to her? Because I said print at the start, but it's more than that, I think, with her. What's great about Mary?
I think the thing that's interesting about her is, obviously she has this sort of architectural background. So I tend to, although it's all, everybody talks about the print, I find her clothes quite architectural. And that's what I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, the silhouette's different every season, and she really explores that.
Yeah.
But definitely it's the prints and the colours, and that's definitely a very London thing. You said that. I went into the stores yesterday because it's really interesting to see the British buy compared to Paris.
Yeah.
And it's just colour, florals everywhere. I mean, if you want to buy a floral dress this season, there are like 30 in every store.
Yeah.
Compared to shopping in Paris, where it's much more low key. And I think definitely when I think of London, Mary, it is that print and that colour. But now she's moving more into embroidery and
brocade. And
definitely more textures. And I think she's moved away from that, especially that digital print, because people were a bit like, we want to see something different, and maybe she felt that as well as a designer, wanting to push it a bit further.
There was probably almost a point where London was so print saturated, and there was also the it wasn't a competition, but there was almost a coherence between what her and Peter Pilotto and Christopher DeVos were doing at a certain point as well. And she's become very much known as a thematic designer, and she will always push one extremely strong message each season, whereas others may be looking to find their idea of a luxurious wardrobe and basics, etc. She will always push something extremely to a T, and sometimes that becomes very literal, sometimes it's more subtle, but you always know what she's talking about each time.
The iconography is very literal sometimes. The shoes last season was just like laces and the prints, and it was really,
What was that point, do you think? We've all kind of discussed this kind of print apathy thing. What was the point where do you think that started to kick in? Because I've noticed that a lot over the past few seasons, it seems texture is the big thing. When was the point that print kind of lost its cool factor? Or has it? Am I being unfair? Do we still love print?
No, I think there's a year or so that it's people have realised that the flatness of print needs to be made, it needs to be enriched, and all of the possibilities of 3D printing became certainly not exhausted, but to a point too readily available to all designers at all levels, from high street to luxury. And I think that people realised that needed to be enriched with something further, and then that's when texture became such a overt theme itself, with teddy bear fabrics and fur, etc., becoming so important, and also becoming saturated across the board.
So is it proving why something is expensive? Do you think that's part of this?
I think it's also, it was a bit like, CGI in film. It's like everybody got, really overexcited about what digital print could do. And actually the thing about the mix that you get going on now with the sort of more, the embellishments or the more sort of focus on fabric, it then turns it into something else. So you've still got the digital print, but it's with something else to give it a sort of a different quality, which I think, and to make it less flat, because I think that is always the problem with the digital. I mean, it's extraordinary what can happen, but it's always flat in comparison to a more traditional way of creating print.
And it was also just completely oversaturated on every level, and it became unspecial. And so I think by adding texture, you can really add individuality to the pieces, and I think that it feels more special as a human being to be wearing something more kind of sculptural and tactile. So I think that's definitely the way forward to make it special.
And you've said that on panels before, haven't you, with your buyer, that they come into the store and they like this idea of a one-off. That's such a big thing to them now. It's this idea that not everyone can have it.
Yeah, especially like someone like, Maria Gratchvogel, she does like lots of prints, but each one is really individual, and there's like flaws in each one. So there's not one, there's not like mass market, mass produced. There's little, like I've had people going, but there's this like mark, and going, each one's individual.
And there's a label in Paris called No Editions that is actually, they make sort of these computer generated geometrical forms, and each one is completely individual and then screen printed onto the garment, and they're all numbered. So the idea being no editions, and it's the same thing, that none of them will ever be the same.
Do we think that's going to be sort of a way forward in shopping, that people like this idea of the kind of touch by hand thing, but also the fact that no one has anything the same, because that's really the top of high fashion, isn't it? This idea of a one-off.
It's a reaction to the sort of mass consumption of fashion, and I think and it's good, because I think also hopefully then it makes people want to keep things and look after them, and sort of they have a history in a way that sort of the idea that because if you can digitally print, then obviously you can just churn them out. So in a way it is trying to sort of redress that, which I think is good.
And in the converse, I think the Peter Pilotto for Target launch, which has just happened about a week ago, is that perfect example of the fact that print has gotten to that stage.
Oh God, that's depressing times for print then, isn't it?
Well, I think it's what we can see with Mary, is that she's not. It's not.
Yeah, I was going to say it's quite an apt time to go to the show, because, as you said, Dan, she's really exploring embroidery. She's been doing so sort of for a few seasons now, and she's always kind of looked.
She's working with Lesage right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which was sort of really came through last season, but also with her shapes as well. So can we scroll through? Thanks, Liam. So we've all got the show notes, but we were saying before that the collection, it's inspired sort of a mixture between symbolisms and everything from kind of, which we talked about how she does so well, whether it's sort of stop signs, and I'm sure there's going to be quite literal stuff coming through in there. She loves a symbol, doesn't she? But she's also looking at uniforms. Sorry?
Perhaps contemporary symbolism more so than classical.
Yeah, completely. But it's that kind of everyday thing that she does so well. That famous collection with the typewriter, and
there was stamps as well, and money, and
And she's also looking at uniform. Brix and I were laughing a little bit before, because it's kind of bakers and the kind of the people you perhaps wouldn't expect to see in a high fashion context.
Candlestick maker as well.
Let the side down.
Oh no.
Thanks, Liam. Sorry.
Oh, and me.
He just wants to be involved. So what's our take on what we're seeing so far? There's quite a disposition between each look. It's chopping and changing.
It feels really different.
It's not what I was expecting,
No,
particularly. But then it's interesting that we're talking about this trans-seasonal thing because the palette is incredibly autumnal and wintry.
Definitely. I love the palette.
And also the sort of layering, I've seen that quite a bit as well. The idea of the different lengths incorporated into one garment.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Which is interesting.
I've seen that a lot
Especially
too.
with the pleating.
Yeah.
Especially with the pleating.
Yeah.
I think we also look at Mary Katrantzou a lot for the one-off pieces, for the dress, for the mini dress, for the maxi dress, for the column, and a lot of what is here is separates.
Yeah.
Sweater dresses, sweater dresses,
Jackets.
I think the separates are going to, I mean, she's super commercial. I mean, she does massive volumes of wholesaling, maybe like the biggest British designer, I think. You know.
But that's the play of Mary, isn't it? From what's on the catwalk and the derivations that she makes of things in jerseys and everything.
But I think what you were
works.
saying about the separates is going to make her even more commercial because then it's so easy,
more translatable.
Totally, and able to like work it into your wardrobe instead of being so specific with that print dress that you could only wear 3 times without everybody knowing what it is. Oh, she's in that dress.
She's in that dress again.
Oh, you're wearing that dress again.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because I never really associate trousers and jackets with her. I mean, it's always dress, so it's quite
Not
interesting
to
to
say that
see.
she hasn't done it before,
No, she
because
has,
she's done some
yeah.
interesting
When she did the
holographic
honeysuit,
silks.
that was beautiful, and I think that got a great response. And this is actually incredibly similar to that. It's, metallic suit, and that was. I remember when that came out. It was that stamp collection that you were referencing before. When that came out, that was a surprise, and it does always feel a little new. But I think it's really interesting what you were saying, Brix, about this kind of idea that if you buy something commercial from Mary, it does tend to be a kind of a jersey dress, as Dan was saying as well, with the print of that season on it. But these separates kind of, I think, appeal to that market. They're easy separates in the same way a jersey dress is easy, like a nice little skirt, a nice sort of sweater that she'd done before.
Yeah, that little silver pleated metallic skirt, you could team it up with all sorts of great stuff from your closet and wear it again and again and get a lot more bang for your buck.
And same with the jackets as well. I mean, you could wear those with black trousers or whatever if you didn't want to do the whole
And
thing.
what's going on here with the metallic work on the dress?
It looks a lot more uptown than evening. I think it's a lot more, but maybe less glamorous, younger collection.
Yeah, no, completely. It's interesting though to think of her sort of trying to grow her brand in that way, because I think it's such a good point that because she takes a theme so literally sometimes, her stuff can look very seasonal, whereas this to me looks a lot less seasonal, maybe because there's a lot of differences between look to look. You're not going to get that same thing where you're wearing Mary Katrantzou spring summer, you're wearing Mary Katrantzou autumn winter. It's much more kind of, I think you could pull pieces from this and not actually know what the designer was, which is not something I'd say with her work.
That's
usually.
true.
Yeah.
Definitely.
It's very straight up and down for her as well, because it seems to be missing some of these ballooning cocoon shapes that she's played with as well, like the completely empire line, which has been a big story in her work. This is a lot of shift dresses and straight columns.
Maybe that's a reaction to last autumn winter, which was very difficult in shape. I think it's quite nice to see something.
There were those finale dresses last season as well that were just it was quite repetitive. I mean, it was incredible to be at the show and see that finale come out, from a dramatic point of view, but I guess it's nice to see something more varied.
It's interesting we were talking about symbols and saying she was going to do modern symbols, because actually the way she's used them, it does look very sort of traditional and
like mosaics or
exactly, yeah. But there's always something quite playful with how she works with her visuals, I think.
I'm thinking it's so much more sophisticated than I've ever actually seen her stuff or ever thought of it.
I'm really impressed. I really like it. It feels new for her, which is really nice, because I think that's one thing that's difficult when you're so sort of known for a certain type of thing, to do something that feels new without.
It feels quite relaxed.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they're very orchestrated. There's a sort of an ease about them which is really good.
Just the way there's a black coat draped over the dress like that. I mean, it's much more.
But I think that may be a hint at how women actually wear her stuff, because on the catwalk she does do it in such a kind of big display, when actually not that many women want to just be in a kind of huge print. You want to sort of break it up a little bit.
No, it's interesting that though. I always think that, and then when you go to her shows, there's so many women wearing a big, huge print. Like she really has this fan base, you know. It's quite cool.
I mean, it's just statement dressing.
Yeah,
totally.
That's and there are a lot of women that want to do that and enjoy it.
Yeah. It's interesting the areas that her clothes are very popular. Like she sells incredibly well in the Middle East, where that kind of colour
and the States.
Yeah. Do you see a lot of it in Paris?
No.
Colette sells Mary's work, and a few other stores absolutely do represent her, but it just doesn't fit in with the general idea of dressing in France, which
Dan
is
and I probably
dark
dress quite.
quite
Symbolise.
There's some
We can tell that from you.
there's some symbols like no U-turn. I can
Oh
say.
yeah,
Yeah, I quite like
I like that.
Yeah.
It's quite patchwork.
And the stop is great as well,
it's
isn't it? And the little figures.
Yeah.
I like that she's done a collection where it's for the buyer, it's not for the viewer, because you would only we can see the special stuff in the close-up, but on the runway you would miss this, so it feels like there's that personal thing. It's that
You know
touch
what?
by hand thing we were talking about.
It's like the Rorschach test of print. Like you look at it, and then whatever is embedded into your psyche comes out, and it becomes what you want it to be.
It's interesting also how badges have become so relevant in recent collections across different seasons and different designers, and I think a great one to call out is Raf Simons, because he's also been applying it to his haute couture and to his ready to wear, and he's made the badge of Dior quite a symbol now for their house, and he's made these jeweled versions of the houndstooth and all the thistle, all various different parts of their universe, and it seems like Mary has taken her own idea of these. It's almost like scalp patches.
completely.
It's good to see the close-ups though, isn't it?
Did you see that? There was like a chainmail butcher's apron.
Oh wow! Are you ever going back?
See? No, a welder's apron.
Very industrial. Yet the dress directly afterwards has this sort of almost like surrealist Venetian mask beading on it. It's quite a
It's very eclectic, which I like.
It's really cool.
I feel less like she's got an idea and she's really pushing it. This feels, again, not only do the shapes feel more playful and fluid, but the ideas are.
It's a bit more something for everyone, you know, this kind of idea of the bits and pieces that you pull out from when you're travelling all over the world and lots of different. It's interesting what you were saying, Dan. I want to go back to that because I talk a lot on these panels about this kind of the new logos, which is something I find really interesting. And for me, when print exploded, I felt like it was really about that in some ways. It was about, it didn't say Mary Katrantzou, but everyone knew it was Mary Katrantzou. And I think that badge thing is very interesting in that it's a way of kind of, seems smarter than putting your brand name on it, but it's effectively the same thing because it means that everyone knows who you're wearing. And that seems to be another thing that Mary does very well. She's kind of keeps this idea of being a very sort of intelligent, cool designer, but it's a new type of branding that she's doing.
But I feel perhaps this show doesn't necessarily stick with that. Now that you say that, I mean, if we look at what we're looking at now, it's a very different wardrobe. It doesn't just say one print evolving into the next print, evolving into the beaded version of that print. This is like quite a lot of options that she's posing
which
this
is
time.
very different to the shoes that we saw last time, where, you know, if you were
it was
wearing,
extremely literal and one note in a way.
I actually think this show is quite brave for her because I think she's stepped away from her super comfort zone and kind of grown up and made it, I don't know, it seems more wearable to me.
I think also it would be interesting because I think there are a lot of people who are interested in her clothes and like, but don't feel they necessarily want to wear the whole shebang, whereas you feel as though you could, you know, pick one or two items and begin to wear her. And I think that's, I think again it comes back to the idea of her being quite commercial, but I think also it's another way of introducing new people into her clothes, which would be good.
Yeah, and I just think it's brave of her to step away from that thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like she's really standing behind her art and letting her art speak instead of like sticking rigidly to what was successful. She's taken a step forward.
It will be interesting to see how she does decline these looks as well into the commercial pieces,
Yeah, no,
because
I agree.
it's much more. It was much more much easier to look at the previous collections and say, okay, flatten that onto some jersey and there you go with the commercial version, which is a tenth of the price. But here, when you're looking at this in sort of elaborate patchworks and the chainmail, etc., I mean, it's suddenly a whole different ballgame. I imagine she might go back to some of the great knitwear that she's been doing commercially, because I think she's very strong with beautiful intarsia and these kind of things. So perhaps that's how we're going to see this.
Maybe with also the separates as well, she's building it into the show itself, you know, some of the more commercial pieces.
She hasn't really done a kind of a kilt type shape before, which we've seen a lot of here. Maybe that's where it's going to kind of filter into a more. It's interesting that you say that, because that was going to be sort of one of my questions, is how is this going to filter down? Because it's not the same as taking a print and just putting it on a jersey as she's done before, which is quite interesting. Would we like to see from Mary a kind of a bigger focus on kind of a jewellery or accessories or something like that? Because that's something that we don't get from her, which does kind of surprise me, given, as you were saying, Brix, the kind of the strength of her business and how well she does sell. What do we think her next logical sort of commercial step would be? Or is that always difficult to?
But Mary is somebody who does do a lot of various collaborations with different brands in terms of little accessories and the shoes, for example, which she does with Louboutin, as you said earlier. I think she's kind of started off those things quite slowly. She is quite hesitant to move into those other areas, and I think she's smart for that, because she has built her core business so strongly. And I think that perhaps, she's done scarves and that sort of thing, that perhaps it's not every designer's wish and nor their calling to actually design a handbag and to design jewellery. It doesn't necessarily mean the brand. It doesn't necessarily need that.
Yeah, it doesn't need that. Do you want to share your exciting news?
What's going on? I'm sorry. Well, okay, I can't really, I'm kind of verklempt. Okay. Okay, I'll share it. So my husband designs a range of tailoring called Mr. Start. And Chiwetel Ejiofor, who's nominated for Best Actor at the BAFTAs, has just gone down the red carpet in his suit.
Oh, wow.
His dinner suit. So I'm very proud.
We were waiting for the sign.
Yeah,
and it
so
just
that's really good.
I thought it was something Dan said, and I was like,
No, but everything Dan
Did I
said
leak
is like
something?
making No. Okay, back to Mary.
So we all seem to be impressed by this. We all seem to think that this is a sort of a new step forward for her. So obviously, as the fashion press, we love it. But do we think her shopper will love this?
I think so. Yeah,
I think she also might appeal to a new client.
So do I.
That's what I think. I mean, some of those layered looks where you've got the jacket and the skirt with the different lengths, and some of it's embroidered and patterned and other bits.
even the pleating, the simpler pleating dresses, they're really
think
gorgeous.
Number
For
4,
me, look
for
4
example,
stands out like quite a sore thumb from the rest of the show. Don't you agree? It's so almost athletic and grungy in comparison. But I feel like there's various versions of that in more of her signature fabrics later in the show, but there it seems to be quite a dark horse.
I think that's the strength of the collection, though, is how it does actually, when you see it from far, when you see it in the sort of the full look, there is this kind of ease and grunginess to it. But actually, when you see the close-ups, it's incredibly detailed and ornate. And to make something that ornate look so easy is a real strength, I think. Because that's something she's...
Even pockets and things, that's much more relaxed than what she would have done
completely.
a few
I think that's
seasons
quite
ago.
confidence, isn't it? That's what I feel. It's a very confident collection, and she's
Completely.
allowing herself to play with some different elements, and in a way you feel actually there are a few pointers that you could see her going into the future.
And Mary's someone who really listens to her clients, I think, as well. I mean, I don't know many designers who actually travel through as much throughout the year as Mary does. She's never not in another store opening or celebration in this country or the other, very exotic locations. She's so active on her social media herself. I mean, all of these things do lead to a woman that's listening to her women.
Oh,
and
definitely, yeah.
I think that's probably showing.
And she's not really... Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that in the past there were a lot of women who wouldn't have been confident enough to wear those bold print dresses, and so it'd be cutting out part of the population. But here, I think definitely her whole sort of client client base is going to be broadened because people who have wanted to buy into it but haven't had the chutzpah will now be able to do that and have a piece of Mary and be able to work it. And so I think it's really good.
Well, it's interesting thinking about the BAFTAs.
Yeah.
You know, we might actually be
Yes.
wearing one of these
that's interesting.
pieces, you know, this evening, for example. I mean, you can see some of those would be they are very statement oriented.
These two looks.
I quite love these asymmetric
I love them.
pieces.
Yeah.
I do.
I wonder if it's sort of Python sequin. I don't quite.
Have we got any more close-ups that we
Lame.
can look at? That was it. Okay.
And it's interesting that it's got that quite sort of strong pilgrim, almost pilgrim pump kind of shoe on it, which grounds them.
It feels very modern though. Those looks, that asymmetry. It's that kind of. You know,
It's
we're
modern.
It feels really modern. That ease. I guess that's the more Parisian section. Maybe she will do very nicely in Paris after this. You know, it's that kind of simplicity and I just threw this on type look, which you don't really get with Mary. She's not a throw-on designer.
That's true.
But
Yeah.
this feels like that.
I love.
Throw on a chunky metal apron.
And get me a diamond.
Where are my keys? Where are my keys? Oh.
Yeah.
Car keys.
Maybe it's magnetic too.
Oh, that would be handy.
That's not a bad idea.
Really handy. God, can you imagine it? Everything. Quite nice. No, I really love this. It's interesting. I want to go back to what you were saying, Dan, about the fact that she does travel so extensively, and she really does, you know, go to her shops and speak to her women all over the world. Because in that sense, and obviously Mary herself is Greek. She's not from London, and she's not really a London designer in that sense. You know, she shows in London, but you get the sense she has an incribly global view. You know, she doesn't really get caught up in this London identity that other designers.
This
seem
is
to.
her least London-looking collection.
Yeah. Feels very international.
Not to
really.
say it's the most. Not to say that means it's the most sophisticated, but it actually does have less to do with those ideas that we had of the London look in the past seasons.
When we say the London look, what do we mean by that? Do you think there is still a London thing?
That's a good one. No, I guess everything we were talking about this sort of brash, bold statement dressing of a lot of print and colour, and perhaps embellishment in a more, I guess in a bolder sense, rather than the way that Parisian embellishment is kind of more discreet, perhaps.
Do we imagine that Mary will always stay in London, or can we imagine her going and showing in Paris, for example?
I think she would almost be a welcome addition to the Paris schedule if you actually see how many shows are on the schedule now that don't necessarily belong there, perhaps. I mean, there is an insane number of shows over a very long period of time, and the level is very, very up and down, I have to say, and it's becoming more so as it becomes more packed.
Do you agree with that, Alice? Do you think she'd be a breath of fresh air?
I think so, and you know, it's nice to have. I mean, obviously, Paris is seen as like, you know, the high fashion week, the final that we all finish on, and it's all the big brands. And I think it's hard for a young designer to find their voice in that schedule. But you know, it's definitely, we all feel like we want to see something fresh by the end of that.
But I think it's quite interesting when you think about Dolce & Gabbana and what they've been doing and seeing how.
That's
so it's
true.
not, you know, but for me, it's not so much about Paris. It might almost more be.
Yeah,
you know, you
that's
think about
interesting.
Versace and
Yeah.
you know, it's more, and Prada. It feels more, for me, more to do with Milan than it does.
Yeah, that makes
than
sense.
it does.
That's really
Paris,
interesting when you say
really.
Prada and embellishment.
Yeah,
and
the
how big
embellishment
that
and
story's
and
become.
also playing with the digital print, and they've all been doing that. You know, you go look at all the Dolce & Gabbana music collections, and it's
Yeah, like
playing
the
with all sorts of
gilding,
the
richness,
gilding,
yeah.
and they feel
It
very
is your
Valentino.
sexiest show,
Yeah.
actually,
Yeah.
so far,
Yeah.
wouldn't you
But-
say?
Yeah.
But to me,
definitely.
Milan is really Italian, don't you think? Whereas Paris is a bit
Yes.
more
International.
open. You have to be Italian. I don't know.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah, that is so true.
But no, it is the
Yeah.
same. You're right.
Yeah.
It definitely picks up those notes of Valentino, you have the lace,
Yeah.
and it's.
That's a really astute point. Well done. It changes the direction you cannot. But it's also, it's interesting that you mentioned Prada, because there's also that same focus on kind of taking something quite sort of everyday and ordinary and then turning it into something very embellished and beautiful. And we were looking at those close-up, those U-turn signs, and that wit, I think Mary does very well.
Yeah.
That's like the
I think
human
so.
skeleton. I can hear
It
those
is, yeah,
bones
yeah.
clicking
Yeah.
all the way down there.
Yeah.
But that's what's great with it. There's a kind of a weird humour to it, which is really great. And I think it's quite hard to do humour on something in a collection without looking really gimmicky. And Mary's stuff, it never actually looks gimmicky, despite how literal she is. You know?
Oh, I think some of the shoe dresses were gimmicky last season.
Did you? Were you not a fan of last season?
Not that I wasn't a fan of last season. I just found that how literal some of those ideas were was too much for me. That it was like almost a superficial transposing of, you know, of all the sneakers and the brogues and all that sort of thing. That was a little bit too much, and I didn't find it beautiful.
No, I find it almost like an interim collection, but she wasn't, you know, obviously you have to keep doing and experimenting, but it felt as though it was something on the way to something else.
And it had two ideas that kind of car crash into each other as well, like these kind of Fabergé egg dresses and then these like shoes.
This shoe dress was like binging on that plate of loose candies, pretty much, you know, after effect.
But I like that she does stuff like that with such confidence, because if you look at the season before that, you know, when she really sort of eschewed print and did all that textured stuff and the kind of really all the black and white photos, you know, and everyone was quite like, what's Mary doing? This is so different. And I love her confidence that she's not afraid to kind of be a little bit.
I think, you know what, I think it's brilliant to have humor in fashion and to have clothes that make you happy. And I actually hadn't thought about it, but it is really hard to get that balance right, and it is really hard for it to not be gimmicky. But when you get it right and you wear a happy dress or, you know, or a happy color, whatever, you feel so good. And
and high fashion's not very happy.
No.
It's rare to...
I have to bring up when she did her very first Lesage collaboration, which was, I think this is one of the most funny and amazing things that she did, was the pencil skirt that was covered in pencils. And it literally had this incredible like yellow pencils with little pink erasers like swirling all over it, and that was quite a feat of genius.
No, I think, and I love that it's a happy dress. I think that's such a nice kind of turn of phrase, because it's true, you know, you rarely look at high fashion for a happy dress. It's all kind of complicated and complex and difficult, and to get joy without that kind of silliness is really great.
a happy dress is fashion Prozac.
I was thinking what you were saying yesterday, Lou, about cocktail dresses, that in a way everybody's getting a bit fed up with London for having lots and lots of cocktail dresses, but and you feel that here again there's, you know, there aren't a lot, and maybe is that another trend that we're seeing?
I think so. I think this idea of like this kind of put on a pretty dress, I think that's really going, just because it's not how girls dress, it's not how women dress at all.
It's also the mark of a more experienced designer, don't you think? Like I often think with the younger collections, they're really dress heavy, and it's really like they stick to that safe zone, you know, because it's obviously easier to sell dresses. And it's maybe perhaps an easier silhouette to work with, and then as the designer gets more and more experienced, I feel like they move into separates and feel more confident with mixing things up. But I think that in Sydney Fashion Week as well, we're very much defined by like the dress culture, and I think it's that finding your feet. It seems to be the safe style.
That's interesting. Do you think it's to do with the shopper as well? I guess because it's not just kind of the practical side of producing a dress and doing the cut of it, but also when you're more confident that your shopper will come to you for your name, you might be more inclined to play around with separates, as we were saying before.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and women, I don't know, I don't have buying experiences, but I think, you know, women buy dresses, and it seems to be a safe thing, whereas I know pants are harder to sell, and it's easier to fit a dress, I guess, than...
But have we ever really remarked Mary doing a coat of note? Because I actually have to... In terms of winter collections, she's certainly not someone that we would think of as a coat designer. I think that coats have been such a huge story in the last years, and interesting coats as well have become so de rigueur that everyone's walking around in a bubblegum pink carbon coat or a Jonathan Saunders gradients and all these kind of quite statement embellished as well coats, definitely. Which is things that things that actually Mary does well, colour embellishment, all those things, but coats has never really been.
But maybe that goes back to the seasonal thing we were saying before. And I don't know how much she is a designer that you go for to buy something that's going to stay in your wardrobe for 5 years. Yeah, she's evening wear.
Really?
No, that's definitely true. And I think that does have a place, as much as I was saying yesterday, you know, I do find this endless cocktail dress thing frustrating. It's nice to see someone doing evening wear and doing it in an interesting way. I think that's really great. Do you find that in the shop though, women want dresses still? Is that a huge... Because I've asked my other friends who are buyers for different sort of luxury stores, and they say it is just dresses that sell always.
Yeah, I mean, dresses are a huge thing, obviously, but also kind of everyday sporty separates as well. I mean, we don't really have in our store big evening wear clients. We have that's not our forte. But yeah, I think we would spend the bulk of our money on dresses, really.
But can we also say quite confidently that a woman is more likely to spend a larger sum on a dress than they are on an expensive trouser or an expensive jacket. It's just like, it's just written crystal clear.
But here's the thing, if it's quite a simple, plain but well-cut dress that they can re-accessorize again and again, then they're going to spend the big bucks. So the problem with Mary Katrantzou, unless you were very wealthy and could just throw the money away, my customer is really savvy and they would be like, whoa, it's too recognizable again and again. That was my issue for my shop, not every shop. I mean, obviously in different countries, different places.
But I think she falls into that category of these shoppers that, you know, there's this huge rise in this sort of £5,000 plus gown, and how easily those are even being sold on the internet.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, just the fact that we live in an age where a woman can click buy without trying on or touching or seeing a gown that costs them.
Net-a-Porter has things that are like 15 grand. It's absolutely mad.
Oh, I was talking to someone from My Teresa the other day, and he said there was something that sold that was 50,000, and just like boom, and there was more than one of them. So it's
incredible. So it shows that there's a market for those kind of things.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that goes back to what we were saying about the global nature of fashion. You know, we may not know the women who wear evening wear in this way or who buy evening wear in this way, but they're out there, and it'd be silly.
And
to
they cannot be ignored.
Yeah, they cannot be ignored.
And they're being catered for, so they'll be happy.
From London as well.
Yeah, that's
which is great.
They're the kind of people that are bored and are looking for something new all the time, and so this is perhaps one of those people that they can turn to.
Oh, to have that life.
£50,000 like that.
It's a dream. What am I doing here? So this is a good collection, and we like it, even if it'll probably never touch our wardrobe. Thank you so much, everyone. I think that's a lovely note to end on. Thanks.